This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Abam. We're continuing in Mishna Berura Daf Hashavua. We're learning Siman Lamed Beis Seif Yud Ches. We're learning again Mishna Berura Daf Hashavua Siman Lamed Beis Seif Yud Ches, where we just read that a reish that you made into a dalid, it's not sufficient just to scrape off the leg, because since it's one script, you have to scratch off the whole thing and then write it again as a reish. That was a big chiddush, but the Mechaber holds that a reish and a dalid is one script. Now the Mechaber continues. Sivkatan, the Mechaber continues. V'im nidbeka ois la'ois. If two letters are touching, bein koidem shetigamer, bein achar shenigmara, pasol. If two letters are touching, whether before the letters are complete, whether after the letters are complete, it's pasol. V'im garer, and if you scraped, v'frida, and you separated, kosher, it's kosher. It's chak tuchais, because you're not writing it, you're scratching away, and then in the middle of the letters appearing. V'loy mikri chak tuchais. Why? Since the letter itself was written properly. So scratching, touching letters is not an issue of chak tuchais, because the etzem letter was written properly. It's just what is lacking is that they're touching. So therefore you could scratch it. Says the Mishna Berura Sivkatan Ayin Ches Shenigmara Ha'ois Ba'arkai Karai. Let's say the letter was completed in its length properly. Kagan Shikasav Tevas Loi. Let's say you wrote the letter Loi. V'nidmak Havav B'katseo Lahalamed. And the Vav, and a little bit of it was touching the Lamed V'chol Kiyotz V'zeh. V'afilu B'negia Koldehu. Even a tiny bit. Shalei Nishtanes Al Yidei Zeh Ha'ois Mitzurasa. That the letter did not change at all from its tzura, afilu hachi pasal. Nevertheless, it's pasal. De'beinan shei ha'ois mukaf kvil. You need that the letter be completely surrounded by parchment. V'im neshpashtu ha'oisis mikayach lachos hadiyai. If the letter spread because of the moisture of the ink, shekayrin giflasin. So basically, you have an ink spill. Ad shenirin kidvukin, that it looks like it's connected, but nevertheless, it seems like the letters are not touching, kosher. So in other words, let's say there's like a little bit of an ink spill, where there's a certain, like a haze from the letter that extends to the next letter, where the letters are not, it might at first glance look like they're connected, but they're not actually connected, it's kosher. V'im ha'oisios noigin, if the letters are touching, even though this was done after the writing, afilu hachi pasal. Nevertheless, it's pasal. Evan o ezer b'simen kuf chav hey siv tezayin b'haga u'b'bei shmuel ayin sham ba'ayin le'el b'be'er halacha b'soif siv tezayin v'em nimsa dibuk bein ois la'ois. If their letters are connected, kishahoitziu sefer Torah l'kriya. If the letters are touching, when you take the sefer Torah out to read it, Ayin lekama misim kuf mem gimel b'Mishna Berura, what to do? Here the Dirshu brings a basic summary that if the letters are touching, if they're touching on the whole length, or even they're touching in a way that it's nishtana at surah sa'is, then you have to take out a different sefer Torah. But if the dibuk is not in the whole length of the letter, and it doesn't change the tzura sa'is, if the dibuk is at the end of the letter, and there's no way to fix it, let's say it's Shabbos, or let's say there is a way, but it's a very big tircha, you could continue to read it. But if it's in the beginning of the letter, or in the middle, So that means that the whole rest of the letter was written b'psul. In other words, if the touching was at the very end of the letter, so the very end of the letter was written b'psul, that means the 99% of the letter was written b'kashros. So then you're allowed to read from that Sefer Torah. But if the beginning or the middle, then yesh machmirim shetzarach lo yitzi Sefer Torah acher, even if it's not nishtanet tzuras ha'os. And there are those who are mekel, because if ein nishtanet tzuras ha'os, you could be soymech. Then even though the ois was not written b'kashros, it's still okay. Again, this is talking about where you find the mistake at the time of the kriya, but l'chachili should not take out such a Sefer Torah. Okay. The Mishna Berura continues. Sivkat and ayin tes. If you scraped it and you separated it, it's kosher. V'adin im raglei ha'ois oigagon v'emtsan magia l'soif b'li hekev klaf. Let's say a leg of a letter, or a roof of a letter, or the middle reaches the end of a line, or the end of the page, so now it's not surrounded by parchment. Rashoy legarik tas, you're allowed to scrape it a little bit. Because again, this is not chak tuchais. The letter already has its tzuras ha'ois. Anytime scraping is just fulfilling a specific technical halachic requirement. For example, you're just scraping so the letters are not touching. You're just scraping so that the letter is not on the top of the line. You're just scraping so that it's hukaf gevil. That's not a problem of chak tuchais. Chak tuchais is an issue if scraping is rendering it, is giving it the tzura of the ois. But if the scraping is just fulfilling a side halacha, then it's not an issue of chak tuchais. It's no worse than if letters are touching where scraping helps. V'da, de'bezeh ma'akiv shaloi kisidran. And in this case, it's not an issue of shaloi kisidron. Kamavar lekaman b'sif chafei. Like we'll explain later on, because you're not adding to the body of the letter. V'afilu ba'oisiyos hashem shenigmaru v'dibukan lamata rashay legrar. Even the letters of Hashem's name that were completed, and then they're sticking together on the bottom, you could scrape it. You're erasing in Hashem's name. So in the Dirshu he brings down that if in Hashem's name they touch, the letters are touching after it was already written, you can't scrape it. We'll see in Sif Chavav. Here it's talking about where you're still in the process of writing it. Now, scraping, two letters that are touching are not an issue of chak tuchais. Says the Mishna Berura, it's talking about where the letter is not changed from its tzura by touching. If the letter's tzura has changed, and a child cannot read it, and certainly if it deviated, distorted to be looking like another letter, could go in vav shenidbak b'soifai lenun. Let's say a vav where the end of it is touching a nun kafufa, a regular nun. Dibuk oiv of. So now a vav touching a nun, it looks like a tes. If it's a thick connection, it looks like a tes. So don't say, well, I could scrape it because all I'm doing is removing the gias ha'oisius. No. You're doing more than that. You're rendering it, you're giving it a tzuras ha'os. So then, a regular kid, if he would read it as a test, it's not going to help to scrape it. It's like a sealed mem that by opening it up, you're giving it a tzura of a regular mem. That is a classic issue of engraving to render it an ois. You're going to have to erase the nun as well. Because now the nun also looks like a test. And it became possible by touching or anything of the like. By the way, I would add, now we're going to have a problem of shaloi kisidron. Any letters written afterwards will be an issue of shaloi kisidron, because anytime there's a hishtanus in the tzuras ha'oisiyos, so by fixing it, now the letters after were not written in that order. So this is going to be a major issue. One more Mishna Berura. In a case where the letters are just touching and removing the negiah is just removing negias ha'ois, that's not an issue of chak tuchais. Says the Mishna Berura, "V'nafla tipas d'yai b'sif yud zayin." We said in Sif Yud Zayin that when a drop of ink falls in an ois, you can't scrape it. So why here could you scrape it? The answer is over there, even though it was originally written kisikuna, but by the little droplet falling inside, the letter is no longer recognizable. The letter, even though it was written properly to begin with, it got ruined through the droplet. As opposed to here, even before you scrape you could still determine and recognize the letter. According to this, if the whole length of the letter is attached to its friend, loy mahani grira, scraping doesn't help. Pri Chadash is still lenient about this. The Pri Chadash says that if the whole length is connected, if loy nishtanat suras ha'ois, you could scrape it. Va'ayin b'shari Ephraim u'v'nesiv hachayim. Basically, the Shar Ephraim says if you find a letter that's connected along its whole length, it will you'll have to take out another Sefer Torah, even b'shas kriya, because Greira doesn't help. Meaning, where Greira helps, then b'di'evet you don't have to take out a new Sefer Torah. Where Greira does not help, then even b'di'evet you have to take out a new Sefer Torah. Okay, Rabbi Glatstein, thank you very much for coming. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a good day. Bracha v'atzlacha. How are you, Rabbi Yeager?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.